Hey everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and the test server for 1.0.1 is now live and we finally get to take a look at gameplay of the Italian auto-reloading medium branch. Today's video will give you a summary of the entire Italian tech tree, give you a glimpse at the new province map or the revival of it, give you my opinion on the fact that Wargaming are no longer going to be selling premium shells and consumables for gold, as well as my initial impressions of the new Frontline game mode. So immediately let's take a look at the Italian tech tree. Now there's going to be one line and it is practically all medium vehicles apart from one light tank that's going to be sitting at tier 2. Oh well, and of course the Fiat 3000 at tier 1 is going to be a light tank as well. Now the Fiat 3000 is basically a better version of the Renault FT, the French tier 1 light tank, if you want to play with a single shotgun and not use the little pop gun that the vehicle has. The Fiat 3000 isn't really going to win any awards for novelty or set any speed limit records with its mobility, but it's about as well-rounded as a tier 1 can get, and if you combine it with some binoculars, you're probably going to be able to snipe fairly well at long range and have enough armor to maybe pull off some miracle bounces up close. Next, you actually have to make a decision about what tank you want to play. Do you want to play the M40 which is a medium tank, or do you want to play the L640. Now, I'll personally be choosing the L640 because of its 12 degrees of gun depression and the fact that it's rather nippy. Well, 42 kilometers an hour is way faster than the 32 that the M1441 can go at. But really, you're not going to hang around at these tiers for very long, and these two vehicles are just very mundane. They got guns, they got a tiny little bit of armor, and they've got reasonable mobility. So far the tech tree is fairly forgettable. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the M1542 at tier 3, which is visually very similar to the tier 2, just a little bit more angled on the turret. And once again, this vehicle is just very well rounded. It's got 10 degrees of gun depression. It has a 47mm that has a decent rate of fire, okay penetration, alpha damage, aim time, accuracy. The vehicle's mobility is 40. It's kind of a bit like just an all-round, medium slow tier 3 vehicle, and again, very forgettable. You're not really going to be wanting to stick around here for too long. Next up, things get very interesting in the form of the P2640, and well, yeah, visually, it just kind of gets a little bit fatter, right? But one of the crazy things about this tank, and I'm still wondering if this is a bug, is that there's a 75mm main armament on this vehicle with amazing high explosive rounds. Look at this, the penetration on the high explosive rounds is 70. With 175 damage and 14.3 rounds a minute rate of fire, this vehicle is going to pick up kills rather quickly against medium to lightly armored targets. So I expect we're going to see this vehicle as some kind of tier 4 M4 derp Sherman, as everything else about the vehicle is pretty much similar statistically. 40 kilometers an hour forwards, a decent power to weight ratio, 50mm of frontal armor and 10 degrees of gun depression, and reasonable accuracy considering it is a derp gun. This thing could be absolutely filthy at tier 4, and frankly it's the first exciting tank along the tech tree. Next up, we're going to be looking at the P43, and this vehicle has a choice of guns. You can either use this 75mm gun that no longer has the crazy high explosive pen, but having more reasonable penetration on its standard and its premium rounds, or I guess you could still use the previous gun, or you can use an upgraded version of the high explosive gun that the tier 4 was using with 70mm of penetration once again, but better armor piercing and heat ammunition at 140mm. That is very nice. But again, it feels bizarre that you're gonna have to make decisions between either using the bottom gun or the top gun. And in the end, it will come down to whether you fancy using high explosive rounds. But once again, everything else about this tank is pretty much the same, just very well rounded, but distinctly average. Anyway, let's jump up to tier 6. This is where things get real. We're in the top half of the tech tree. And wow, this tank looks very different. Reminds me a little bit of the Crusader turret, that tier 5 British light tank, or is it a medium tank these days? Now the P43 is special because it uses a high alpha damage gun, 240 alpha damage. You have to jump up to tier 7 to get that kind of alpha on something like the T-34-100 Constructor, that tier 7 Czechoslovakian medium tank, or alternatively something like an A44 with the 107mm with 300 alpha, or the Leo, right? But 240 at tier 6 does feel very significant, and while the penetration isn't exactly anything to write home about, you probably could still make it work, especially in a good matchup, but you're kind of going to struggle against tier 7 and tier 8 tanks even with premium rounds compared to something like a Cromwell Berlin. Other things that are great about this vehicle are 80mm of frontal hull armor and pretty well angled on the upper plate, but there's one thing that really annoys me, and that is 7 degrees of gun depression. It's a real big hindrance to the vehicle, and you're going to not be able to work ridge lines like the previous vehicles were. Nevertheless, with a top speed limit of 50 kilometers an hour and a decent power to weight ratio, this looks like it might be a tier 6 tank to keep your eyes on, especially with 360 meters view range. You could probably get away with coated optics if you have a rather skilled crew. So jumping up to tier 7, we're going from the P43 BIS to the P43 TUR. And things look fairly similar. I mean, the front of the tank is a little bit embellished, the turret looks a little different, but it's pretty much the same kind of vehicle, just a little bit bigger. So interestingly enough, this vehicle uses the same 90mm main armament the tier 6 was using. However, do you notice how the rate of fire decreases? The accuracy stays the same, the aim time stays the same, and your penetration, well, it goes up with your standard rounds. 165 is not bad for standard ammunition at tier 7, but 195mm of premium rounds? That's not great when we're starting to pack kind of like 250 on the T20, or even something like a Comet has got, I think, 208mm of APCR. And so maybe this vehicle will be very good for a free-to-play player, as you've got a decent alpha damage and you've got decent standard penetration. But I think, again, that this vehicle is going to struggle against higher tiered opponents at tier 8 and tier 9 with weaker premium rounds. Everything else about the vehicle is pretty much the same as the tier 6, and I just really don't feel that it's worth the jump up from tier 6 to tier 7, considering how little of an upgrade it is. Okay, so far, nothing really special. You're not seeing the new Italian auto-reloading mechanic, and you'll be happy when you reach tier 8 with the P44 Pantera, because now you can get the auto-reloading mechanic right from the get-go with the stock gun. Now, one thing that's very interesting about these vehicles is that if you use the stock turret, you actually have only 2 rounds of ammunition in the magazine, even if you're using the top gun. And that's because, as we see here, you actually research the top gun on the vehicle before you research the turret. But there's one thing I'd like to highlight, and that is, with the stock turret and the top gun, as I mentioned, it's got 2 rounds limited in the auto reloader, but 5 degrees of gun depression, ladies and gents. That's absolutely horrific for a vehicle that doesn't really have that much armor. 100mm of turret armor? This vehicle strongly resembles a Panther, right? And so if you're planning to get the Pantera, well, you could do okay with it with a stock turret and the stock gun. Well, actually, when I take a look at it, 165mm of standard pen and 195 on the premium rounds on the stock gun. Well, that's not going to work against tier 10 tanks. So you might want to save up some free experience when you hit this vehicle, so you can just skip straight towards the top turret. That's going to cost you 16,700 for the turret. It's going to cost you 19,000 for the gun. That's not too bad for a tier 8 vehicle, but I think it will make the vehicle just so much more enjoyable. And when you are packing that top turret and the top gun on this vehicle, you now have 3 rounds in the magazine with 2.5 seconds delay between the shells, and your reload speeds are very similar to that of the Projeto 46, the tier 8 Italian premium medium tank. And I've been playing this vehicle inside Wargaming's Frontline game mode, and you know what? It's fairly good. I enjoy the P44. Next up, we're making the jump to tier 9 with the standard B. And wow, this is starting to look like a very modern vehicle, a lot like a Leopard, right? And that's understandable because this vehicle is one of the prototypes developed and built under the Kampfpanzer Standard program, which Italy joined in 1958. And this was one of the proposed prototypes that eventually then became the Leopard 1, or led to its production. So when the vehicle is stock, it's pretty much going to be like the previous tank. Its penetration isn't going to be great for tier 9, but it's definitely going to be usable, and the vehicle has decent unload speed of only 2 seconds, accuracy and aim time, so you probably don't need free experience for this vehicle, although it will significantly help. Now, you unlock the gun before you unlock the turret on this tank, which is 105mm, and now things get really exciting, because even with the stock turret, you still get to carry 3 shells in the magazine, and your alpha damage goes up to 360, and wow, look at this penetration, 268, 330 on the premium rounds, and it's also got HESH, 105mm penetration, 440 alpha HESH rounds. It was starting to look like it was really good news for this vehicle, but of course, when you get the upgraded turret, it just makes everything about this tank a little bit better, including the gun depression, which now goes up to 10 degrees, and you know what? This tank would be absolutely awesome if it was not for the case that it has 3.25 seconds delay between the shots, ladies and gents. And so what this means is it actually takes you 6.5 seconds to unload its 3-round magazine, doing 1080 damage, which is great, but oh my lord. Because of the way that the Italian auto reloaders work, where if you fire, you cancel the progress on your next reload, it really destroys the damage per minute of the vehicle, and unless you have very prolonged engagements, I found it incredibly hard to get sustained damage out in the tier 9 tank. And if you play the vehicle just as a single shot non-auto reloader, you have less than 2000 DPM, which is less than a lot of tier 7 medium tanks and much less than a lot of tier 8 medium tanks. And you just can't compete with other tier 9 vehicles. Even something like a Centurion 7.1, which is not fabled for its damage per minute, is packing more than the standard B. Furthermore, the vehicle has really bad dispersion values, 2.9 seconds aim time, and look at its dispersion when it's moving and when it's turning the turret. It's really, really poor, twice as bad as the M46 pattern. And when you combine this with practically no armor and view range that's 20 meters less than some of its tier 9 medium tank competition, it's just not quite there for me. But surely we don't have to worry, because now we're jumping up to tier 10 for the Projeto M40 Mod 65, and wow, this thing looks pretty cool. To me, it looks a lot like the BTSV, that tier 3 premium Soviet light tank. All it needs is another kind of searchlight here, and then it would be wearing its full sunglasses. One thing you got to worry about with this vehicle is this big old turret around the back. When you turn the turret to the side, it kind of exposes itself around corners, which is a little bit awkward. But the main focus of this tank, of course, is going to be the 105mm, and does it get much better? Well, kind of yes, but also kind of no. Sure, you can now have up to 4 shells in the magazine, but the vehicle's damage per minute has barely gone up, and its intra-clip reload is 2.75 seconds. Something like a T57 Heavy only has a 2-second intra-clip reload, and it's doing 400 damage rather than the 360 that the Projeto 65 does. And so to unload the full 1440 magazine in this tank, it's going to take you 8.25 seconds of continuous fire, while something like a TVP T50/51 is unloading the entire magazine within 4.5 seconds. Sure, it's doing 1280 damage, but that's really not that much less. And to have to only expose yourself for pretty much half the time, it's significantly better. But of course, Wargaming promised us that the Projeto 65 was meant to be worse when it plays as a single shot and worse when it plays as an auto loader. But my word, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that if you fully unload this magazine, you have a 16-second reload. And of course, because of that intra-clip reload of 2.75 seconds, if you fire while you're reloading, you're going to lose at least 2.75 seconds of your previous reloading just because of that. And frankly, when we compare this vehicle to some of the best medium tanks at tier 10, and then some vehicles which are really not favored for their gun handling, we see that this tank has as bad turret traverse dispersion as the STB-1, and its aim time is 2.3 seconds, which is worst in class along with the STB-1. And so you feel like you're forever aiming in this tank. And is the armor anything to write home about? No, 50mm at the front and 120 at the front of the turret. The vehicle packs 400 view range, which is not bad, but the Leopard is packing 410 along with the Centurion Action 10 and the STB-1, and the M48's packing 420. It's really, all in all, just not kind of great news for this tank. But hang around, as I'm going to try and get you a full review of the Projeto 65 on this channel tomorrow, where I can go into more depth and detail. And I wouldn't be surprised if Wargaming do significantly buff the Projeto 65 in iteration 2 or 3 of the test server. So another one of the new features of 1.0.1 test server is that there's a new map. Well, a revival of the province map. So if I zoom out all the way here, a lot of you will remember what this map used to be. Originally, this map used to be available at high tiers, and then Wargaming changed it so it was only available at low tiers. And all that really happened is people just camped on the opposite sides of the valley here. We can see a spawn up in the northeast and spawn in the southwest, and they'd just spot each other and shoot. And the map was much smaller, it felt like previously. Now it's actually quite large, and we can see that it's actually quite challenging to see all the way across unless you've got some really decent view range. Now, the problem with Province, of course, previously was it was an east versus west fight, so Wargaming have tried to make changes to encourage the teams to cross over, as we can see here. Buildings all the way along here, and whoa, okay, you've got multiple ways to go up. You can either go along here and go around there, or you can attack along this way. And I guess, of course, if you make your way along here, you're going to be able to shoot back at the enemy's advance that have gone over long from the northeast, while also hopefully getting some cover from your allies that are towards your west. The thing that concerns me very much about this map is that when I played it, the team that spawned on the northeast side were easily able to still rush down along here and then try and get into defensive locations, either along here or specifically they were able to use these kind of rocks. And then they were able to, some of them were even able to sneak their way up here, and as soon as they got into this position, some of the faster tanks, well, this is just the ultimate opportunity to stop people from advancing along this corner and even to get some shots over along the way. As we can see, my position here is perfectly renderable from this location of the map. And so while I find the province looks absolutely gorgeous in HD, and I think it's awesome that Wargaming are trying to get an Italian map, so to say, with the olive groves along here to come out along with the Italian tech tree, I just really hope that they've kind of thought this one through and that people are going to truly take this as a northwest fight, and we're not going to be turning this into another Erlenberg where people are turning it into an east-west fight where who's really going to cross the center of the map towards the mid and latter parts of the game if the teams do decide to camp it out. But I personally wasn't able to get onto this map many times on the test server, and really we're going to have to wait for release to see if it's a good one or if it's a bad one. Next, I want to give you my opinion on what Wargaming seem to be kind of stating is one of the big features of this next update. And that is that they're planning to disable purchasing premium shells and consumables with gold. And lo and behold, on the test server, if you go here, there's no kind of drop box here to be able to purchase it for gold. Now, what's interesting is that Wargaming are stating that premium shells and consumables have been one of the hottest topics on the agenda, and during the upcoming common test will take the first step towards making a key revision to the entire mechanic. And they say that this is just the first step, as it will take some time to completely phase out the number of shells acquired with gold. Well, maybe I'm a little bit confused here, but surely this is the end of being able to purchase any shells with gold if you can't do it in the game, right? Maybe what they're suggesting is that they want everybody who has purchased loads of premium shells with gold to kind of use them up. As their next sentence states that they want the shell mechanics to settle down and then they can go ahead with the rebalancing. So it'll be very interesting to see what Wargaming plan to do with premium shells in the future. And sure, great, you've basically changed it so that people don't accidentally purchase them with gold. But let's be honest, what can you do right up in the top corner of your screen? Okay, I want 20,000 credits to be able to buy a large repair kit. How much is that going to cost me? 50 gold? Wow, oh, it's just one extra click, right? There you go, an extra click. And one thing is for sure is that I am going to still continue to call premium shells gold rounds, because realistically, unless you've got a tier 8 premium tank, and most likely you've also got yourself a premium account, then you really can't afford to fire premium shells, and the only way to get these things, at least in large supplies, is with gold, right? And finally, I want to talk about the changes to Frontline. And yes, they are changes because Frontline is not a new concept. A year ago, I posted a video on the original 30 versus 30 Frontline at tier 10. And I thoroughly recommend you go and check that out if you want to know about the fundamentals of the Frontline game mode. But to get you up to date, the changes are that now it is going to be for tier 8 vehicles. Now that's exciting because it's going to be more accessible to a wider audience, and also I guess you'll be able to earn experience in your tier 8 tanks or just crew train in your tier 8 premiums. And also the Wargaming is stating that Frontline will be available on a temporary basis and will occasionally appear in the game, I guess as some kind of event. The other new features of this version of the Frontline game mode is that there are new consumables that you can assign to your tank. You can get smoke screen, morale boost, engineering crew. I'll just show you here. If we go and access the Frontline game mode and we click on a vehicle, then we can see a whole new consumable slot where you can assign whatever you want. Smoke screens literally lay down a smoke screen of cover that can keep your allies, I guess, hidden or allow you to make an advance across a dangerous lineup of enemy tanks. The Recon Flight spots enemy vehicles for you. The Inspire boosts your crew and also the tanks around you, which can allow you to reload faster and I guess see a little bit further, just make everything about your tank a little bit better. While Engineering allows you to capture really fast. And then there's an airstrike and an artillery strike for just damaging the enemy vehicles. And what's cool about this is you can assign different consumables to different vehicles. So for example, maybe I want to be an engineer in the Pantera because I want to try and cap the enemy faster, or maybe I'll assign that for one of my light tanks for the initial assault. While maybe in one of my tank destroyers I want to have Inspire so I can boost my crew for when I've got a real good line of opportunity against some enemy tanks. While maybe in a heavy I might want to take a smoke screen so I can dump it down on the map and then advance across usually what would have been a horrendous kill zone to make it to the next building, or maybe just the enemy cap circle. All in all, everything else about the Frontline game mode hasn't really changed. There's 3 fronts that you advance along, and you have to take base 1, base 2, and then you have to destroy the enemy turrets at the end. And if you manage to take down 3 out of 5, you win the game. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is about it for the 1.0.1 test server. Stay tuned to the channel as I'm going to be getting you some more in-depth looks at these individual features. And if you enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful, please consider giving it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby, and this week 592 of you voted, and the winner is the Panzer 7 with even 50 votes. So come along right now as I'm going to be playing through the entirety of the German rear-mounted turret heavy tank line, so you can see if a tech tree that's maybe worth trying to grind through to pick up, or alternatively if you already have the vehicles, maybe pick up a few tips and tricks along the way. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby, and as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.